right. Welcome to the Happy Hour Money Podcast. I am your host, Joshua Bennett, and along here is my co-host, Isaiah Douglas. Isaiah, welcome.
Welcome. Cheers, everyone. Thanks for tuning in.
Yeah, hopefully you're sipping a frosty beverage at the moment, or if you're driving to work or commuting or something, hopefully you're not sipping a frosty beverage at the moment. But we're going to be talking a little bit about getting to work optional and whether you need to do that frugally. So for those of you who don't know, one of the ideas we had behind the podcast is we don't really necessarily believe in a traditional notion of retirement, and just because for a lot of millennials and stuff out there, things like Social Security and stuff will probably be gone by the time they get there. So
it's heresy. There's no way. It's got to be there, man.
Yeah, exactly. So we believe in the idea of like, okay, well, if you control your own destiny anyways, so why not, retire earlier if you want to, or if you want to keep working to the day you die, so be it as well. So we call this idea, getting to work optional. And with that, there's, it's a lot of resonance to the sort of FIRE community, if you will, like the financially independent, retire early community. And one of the mantras of the FIRE community is, sort of living frugally and basically saving aggressively and all these things. So it's all about basically retiring early, but you do that by not spending a lot of money. So in our idea, do you think someone has to live frugally to get to a work optional lifestyle? What are your thoughts, Isaiah?
Well, I think defining work optional, it could be, hey, I work in big tech. My job is great. I get paid a lot of money. I can save, that's great, but I ideally like to do this other kind of more hobby job, or maybe I'm going to make half or a quarter of what I'm making do this other job. To me, that's still work optional. That's success. You're getting to the point where you enjoy what you're doing. And so, yeah, you have to be able to save and put money aside. And I think being frugal is one of the tenets of building wealth. And if you read The Millionaire Next Door by Dr. Sarah F.I.R.E. and her late father, he wrote The Millionaire Next Door back in 1996, and then they redid it I think in 2018, where they co-authored and they kind of checked in on some of the data and the research. And frugality is one of the core tenets of wealth building, but it's not the only one that's there. But you'll hear the story of hey, the little grandma that passes away and has all this money, right? She was very frugal. And there's countless stories like that. But I don't think that is the only thing that you have to do, because you can be super frugal and not make a lot of income and still never get there, because you are frugal, but then you live in an expensive area and you don't make as much money. And so I think you need to expand the idea of being frugal. And I think, you have to kind of attach flexibility with that as well. And I think one of the big issues with the FIRE community is they use some interesting, I'll put it interesting, and I'll put air quotes for those watching, right? Return assumptions for their allocation from an investment standpoint. And we've had investment conversations. We'll have more investment conversations, and maybe we'll tackle, hey, the flaws with the FIRE methodology from an investment standpoint. That's not today's conversation. But with that, yes, being frugal is a part of it, but it is not the factor. And I think so many people lose sight of if I just delay, I can get there. And that's one path. It's not saying that it can't be done, but I don't think it is that's the only way to do it. I think the idea, and something we've talked about, is business ownership, or having some sort of entrepreneurial outlet or a side hustle or something else to build that up. And it doesn't always have to be a reduction. Sometimes it can be an increase in versus a reduction of. It's probably a little bit of both.
Yeah. I mean, to your point, I think if we think about, okay, what does it take to get to work optional? So there's one of two ways. You either need a nest egg built up that can self-sustain the lifestyle you want to live through distributions, or you need cash flowing assets that can replace your earned cash flowing assets, aka or cash flow. So instead of having a job, you would need, say, rental property income or business income or dividends or interest to replace that, or distributions. So basically you can either invest in assets, or you can save. And so there's really only two paths to kind of build up this nest egg, or get the cash flow needed to walk away from the workforce. Is either you can save your way to it, or you can make more money. So you can either spend less money or make more money. Those are really the only two mathematical paths. But that being said, I think what a lot of people in the FIRE community, and when you think about living frugally, I think it actually misses the point. I'm always been a proponent of seeking to make more money than to just save your way to wealth. Saving's important, but I think where a lot of people miss the mark is they just save across the board, or save on the wrong things. For example, skip your Starbucks every day and, put that money into a 401k. And you're gonna,
shout out Susie Orman.
Yeah. that's all well and good, but if I get a lot of joy in my life from getting my Starbucks, then you should get your damn Starbucks. Like, it shouldn't be you have to just live frugally, period. Like, it should just be making sure if you're saving money that you're saving or only spending in areas that actually add true value to your life. Like, you don't spend on mindless shit that really adds no value to your life, because then that is definitely money that could be stripped away, saved, or when you actually make it to work optional. Well, if you have gotten used to that lifestyle, then it's much easier to maintain that lifestyle and live fulfilled on a much lower budget, right? And that's where I think a lot of people really miss the mark, is just not focusing on, okay, what am I actually spending on and what actually adds value?
Yeah, the alignment of values and money, I think, is super important, because, yeah, you could say, hey, we're going to spend a lot more on food because we want to source high quality, protein, or we want to be able to support local businesses. Our gym is not cheap, and we want to go and support that and be there because there's a sense of community, and also it helps us be healthier, so we can hopefully have, health insurance premiums maybe in the future or something, right? Like, there's all kinds of things where you could spend money to make it a better lifestyle, but it doesn't have to be, ritzy and glamorous and over the top. Like, you can drive the, 2012 Toyota Corolla for a long time, but spend lavishly on the other pieces. Like, that's fine. But if cars are your thing, maybe you want to have a nicer vehicle and you're willing to sacrifice somewhere else. So there is kind of that give and take. But yeah, I agree. It is, you make more or you save at a really aggressive rate. I think the other thing is, if you're trying to get to that work optional lifestyle, and we've talked about this other times in the podcast, it's not necessarily that you have to always put, max out your 401k. That might not be the right spot to save, right? You need the flexibility. So you need to understand, what are we solving for? What are we working towards? And then you can answer a lot of those decisions on where and how to invest and where the money should go. I think that's super important.
Yeah, and also understanding your limitations as well. Just because, one of the conversations I have with clients along this lines is like, because again, you can either fund it via cash flow or you can fund it via accumulation. Well, accumulation is much easier from like a labor perspective, because most things that cash flow also have different risks and different attributes, like real estate, for example, or small business ownership. It's impossible to own a small business and essentially be an absentee owner if you have the right managers and stuff in place. So where you may be working 0 hours a week, or intelligently maybe working an hour or two just to make sure someone's not stealing money. But
yeah, Tim Ferriss would say it's the 4 hours, but it's fine.
Yeah, I think that is realistic within the realm of possibility. But that being said, your manager could also quit, and now you have a full-time job, right? Same with like real estate. Like the ideal way to hold real estate is you own it directly and you're the landlord. But obviously, being a landlord has its own series of headaches and things like that. So as an individual investor and someone trying to get to that type of lifestyle, well, you may not want to start buying those type of things because you work 80 hours a week as a tech entrepreneur and having a business today. You can't take that risk of having 2 jobs, or you don't want to deal with a 2 a.m. call or the stress of an eviction or something like that. Okay, well, cash flow opportunities may not be right for you. So then we have to look for accumulation. And yeah, if you're going the accumulation path, then it becomes a trade-off of like money now versus money later. And the more you can save, obviously, the more you can accumulate quicker. But again, you have to look at the trade-offs of like, okay, what am I sacrificing today for what am I getting long term, and is that value worth it? Or you can say like, yeah, I might prefer that nice car today to work an extra couple of years. I don't hate my job that much, so it may just be worth those trade-offs. But it's really about understanding your budget and kind of where you're spending your money and what actually is adding value.
I think the other thing is the concentration versus diversification. I think a lot of people maybe, and I think financial advisors are guilty of this. We probably have been guilty of this at times too, of talking about diversification versus concentration. So like the concentration to build wealth, and then you diversify to keep it, because you really only need to get rich once, right? And then there can be gambling and like stupid things that you do where maybe it worked out once, and then he's like, you don't need to do that again. No, don't do it again. Like that is not going to help you grow and build wealth the second time. And so you want to understand like, okay, if I have a concentrated bet in my business or in this job or in this, equity compensation tied to my current employer, that's fine. But then once you get to the point where, this starts to unlock the doors of things that I want to go do, you need to then de-risk and then start to diversify. But yeah, you should lean in, especially when you're younger, to say, okay, what am I really good at? What am I interested in? Where can I, drive, the skill set that I have to create as much value as I can? And then from there, over time, you can kind of scale that back. But yeah, I don't think you should be like, oh my gosh, I have to diversify from, day one at 20, whatever, right? doesn't really make a lot of sense versus leaning in and saying like, okay, I can do this thing and I can either work my way up in this corporate opportunity or I can go start my own thing. But yeah, you then need to understand like, okay, if you're a business owner and you've done well and you have really good cash flow and it has a good value and you can, sell it and it'll be more than enough. Okay, you don't need to then take the cash flow from that and be super risky from the investment side next to that. Because then when everything goes to crap, all of a sudden, all that just kind of all goes to one to where it's going to go down at the same time. And so it's like, how can you offset that and be, more resilient and more robust? And like, that's when it makes sense to talk about risks more versus trying to get to the point where, if you can't get out of that, you need to take risks to like move the needle. And I think that's a nuanced and difficult conversation to talk in like, big, broad brushstrokes. But for an individual, like you need to sit down and kind of understand like, where can I lean into and grow this thing versus, okay, where do I need to, trim and maybe take some risk off the table? And that can change from year to year.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And I mean, actually something we haven't chatted about yet, but along budget lines, kind of circling back to that $4 cup of coffee idea.
$4 was the pre-inflation.
Yeah, pre-inflation, but we'll use that. But let's say you get a coffee, every work day, which is, let's call it 300 days for simple math. Well, if you cut out that cup of coffee every day, you're saving $1,200 a year, which is not bad money, right? But let's say you make 150 grand as a tech employee, or we'll use simple math. We'll say 100 grand. So you're saving like 1%, right? Which is not bad. But what a lot of people don't do as well is think through like where are the budget things that really have an impact. They sort of go to like the ancillary things like coffee. Well, hey, things like if you live in San Francisco and your company offers remote, well, maybe you look at, well, I used to say Boise, but Boise got super expensive during
Indianapolis, Indiana.
Yeah, or look at like actually I was just in Fayetteville, Arkansas the other day, and like it was like I was shocked at how beautiful it was. And
Northwest Arkansas is legit.
Yeah, like how I blew my mind. But like I mean, the cost of living there, I imagine, is super cheap. But like I mean, just moving out of California, for example, pretty much to any other state, you're immediately saving 6-7% on taxes, if not even more on your salary. So that's $6-7 grand just on taxes. And you factor in like, okay, rent in Arkansas is probably $1,000 a month compared to $3,000 in San Francisco.
Depends on where you are in Arkansas. Yeah, Bentonville, home of Walmart, it's a little pricier up there. But yeah, it depends. But you can find really inexpensive places to live for sure.
But yeah, the United States is a huge, beautiful, chunk of land. Like there's a lot of really underrated communities. Are good for sort of all ages, whether you're trying to date to find your future spouse, or married with kids, or whatever, like whatever stage of life you're in. Like you don't necessarily have, especially these days, you don't have to be in the big cities to get the good job or the right income, especially since the pandemic. Like you can pretty much live and work wherever. And an easy way to save your way to wealth optional or work optional really quickly is look at your largest expenses, and if you can cut those down, well, you can make massive changes pretty quickly and still do all the things you enjoy, like taking vacations, buying a coffee every day, having a nice car. Whereas if you have that in San Francisco, well, yeah, you're not saving as much. Whereas if you do that in northern Arkansas, all of a sudden you're saving a boatload,
Yeah, I think it makes total sense. I think going back to kind of 2020, 2021, I think a lot of people revisited what it is that they value when things slowed down, or people had more time to think on what they actually wanted, and do they want to run as fast as they've been running, right, with work or with different things that are out there. So if that is you, there are options to say, hey, there's lots of businesses that are looking, and again, it's getting a little slower now, but looking for talented people, and it's really hard to find talent. And so they're probably going to be a little bit more flexible on where you are and what you do. And yeah, maybe you take a little bit of a pay cut, but you move to somewhere else. Like net, it can actually be significantly higher. Back to your point with taxes and cost of living and, a vehicle. I think that's always another big one. Like look at what you're paying in rent or your mortgage, the vehicle that you drive, and then, you address those two things and you will be much, much better than, again, zooming in on the, my grocery bill, or, the coffee, or, the, this or that. Those are the things that are those big fixed costs that don't change. So yeah, work optional means different things to different people, but it doesn't always have to be like, I'm going to be the miser that won't do anything, or is the hermit that is cut off from everything else. Like you can balance things, and most of the things that we truly love and the experiences that really are memories and things that we stay with us aren't these huge expenses. Sometimes it can be vacations, sometimes it can be different things, but yeah, move to a community that you resonate with, build relationships, build friendships, do things together. And I think that community element is something that a lot of people, especially in a digital world, want and strive for. it's hard to find, but if there are interest in things that you have that are outside of work, that's where you can build and foster those relationships that can really move the needle on quality of life and extending what you want to do, but also possibly lowering the cost of things. Because sometimes in big city, you feel like you have to go out and do things all the time because you're there, and it's like, are you really enjoying it, or are you just doing it because that's what you think you need to do, and that's what, there's nothing else to do, and you can do that. It's like, yeah, go do those things in other places and other areas, and might be equally as valuable or not.
Well, so I have conversations with people all the time like that, and I'll beat up on San Francisco with my personal biases, but I lived in Chicago, then lived in San Francisco, and like Chicago, like I lived very well on pretty much no money, and then started making really good money in San Francisco, and spent a lot of nights and weekends in just because we couldn't afford to do anything. And it's like, when you look at lifestyle choices, like it's, I have a lot of clients that are the same way, that, make really good money on paper and live in the Bay Area, but don't enjoy life that much because they can't afford to go do anything. But again, they think that's the thing that they have to do to be there because they work in tech or whatever.
Have to buy a home.
Yeah, have to buy a home here. It's like, no, you don't. There's a big wide world out there with, and not even just in the United States. Obviously, there's perks of living in the United States, but I've had friends and colleagues that have moved into, Portugal or moved abroad and are working remotely from abroad. Like there's so many options these days, and you can drastically lower your cost of living and do all these things to be more frugal just by changing the environment you're in, and without making really drastic lifestyle changes. You can actually maybe even improve your lifestyle while saving more money. It's just, I don't think people necessarily realize this. Like, look at the things that you actually value. Like, do you really like San Francisco for being in San Francisco, or are you there just because you're in tech, or like you feel like you have to be? And maybe like what's a good idea is like go start renting Airbnbs in random cities and find a place you like.
Yeah,
like
totally.
Me and my wife have talked about doing this for a while. If Indy's not our long term, maybe we just start, spend a year, go 12 different cities and find, where we might want to be.
I just saw an advisor that I don't know if I know him. We've communicated back and forth, but on Twitter, and him and his family, they're going to go and live in Tuscany for a year. They don't speak Italian. They're going to go, and it's just like, hey, we're going to have this experience. They have a younger family, and they're just going to go do something completely different that they've not done. And I think a lot of times people are afraid to do those things because they feel like this societal pressure or pressure from family or friends, like, oh, you're crazy, you shouldn't do that. Like, people don't do that. It's fine. And sometimes maybe they are speaking truth and you shouldn't do something. So again, it's always a fine line there. But you don't have to live your life on the terms of someone else. And so I think going back to your point, like, you can go explore and try things. And you know what? A lot of times you can always move back. That's the crazy thing, right? If you don't like the change that you make, you can always go back to doing what you were doing before, because you know that you can come back to doing those things. And I think a lot of people are worried or nervous about taking a leap of doing something different. It's like, you can go find another job. You can go find another place. And you know what? As bad as it sounds for a lot of companies, you are super replaceable, and they will figure out a way to exist without you. And that sometimes doesn't feel good, but there's a lot of truth to that.
Yeah, but I think tying a bow on the conversation, I think really what it boils down to is like, do you have to live frugally to get to work optional? No, you don't. There's other ways. But I think living frugally, there is a benefit, but I think it really boils down to, all right, not necessarily just living frugally for frugally's sake, but really dissecting, all right, what are the things that give you value in life today and in the future when you become work optional, and making sure your money is actually going to the things that you value today, tomorrow, in the future, etc. And the only way you do that is track where your money's going and make sure it's going to the right places. And if it's not, all right, time to make some lifestyle changes, whether it's extreme ones like moving to an entirely different state, country, whatever, or, if you're spending a lot on, gum and Starbucks and, don't really get that much joy from it, it's just a habit. Okay, well then, then it's time to delete those from your life. It's, making coffee super easy. But anyways, any parting thoughts or pearls of wisdom, Isaiah?
I think you said it well. I'm going to leave with like, subscribe, follow us, reach out. If you have topics or things that are interesting or questions, you can certainly reach out and find Josh and I across the interwebs, and you can send us your questions, and we'd love to dive into those. And appreciate you tuning in, and till next time, cheers.
Yep, cheers.